This is channel 253. Beep, boop, boop, boop.
On this episode of the Grit and Grain podcast.
You know, getting through filtration, bright beer, and packaging with as much attention to detail and respect for the liquid is not easy. And that is where good flavor comes from. You know, from seamer capper back to filtration is where a lot of the war, I believe, is won.
Welcome to the Grit and Grain podcast, where we explore and celebrate the craft beer industry, community, and history in Tacoma, Washington, and surrounding Pacific Northwest areas. Thank you so much for hanging out. Let's get to it. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Grit and Grain podcast, coming to you guys from the historic Parkway Tavern in Tacoma, Washington. My name is Matt McLaren. I'm here as always with Ron Swarner.
Well, hello.
How's it going, Ron?
Good. Happy Mother's Day to all the grit and grainy mothers out there.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry I made fun of your clothes.
That's fine. You made fun of my pen, too.
I know. You're dressed like a food critic that only writes about pumpkin patches. Tell me I'm wrong.
No.
Sorry, I need another beer.
All I got was a rock.
And Sean Jackson is back this week.
Hello.
What's up, dude?
Oh, it's going to be the most sincere podcast.
Sorry in advance.
Yeah.
How you doing, man?
Fucking fantastic. I'm
Good.
happy to be back. And
It's good to have you back.
yeah, it's a beautiful day. And
Ron and I really reset everybody's expectations last week.
Yes.
And it was a great time, but I'm glad that this week is back on track.
Totally.
Speaking of which, who the fuck are we talking to today?
the one and only Tony from Boneyard Brewing. Yeah. This is a big deal
Hell yeah, man.
for us.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's
yeah.
a big deal.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you guys.
And getting outside of the state borders, too. You know, do a little expanding our podcast reach, I guess.
That is true.
Yeah.
We haven't done a ton of Oregon, so this is pretty exciting.
Sister states. And
Well,
stuff.
And
thank you.
happy 13th anniversary.
Yeah,
too.
we had our 13-year anniversary last weekend at the pub there in Bend. I can't believe we got to 13. It was against all odds, but here we are at the Parkway with you guys. It's going to take me just a minute to settle in and get with the vibe and the flow. Take a big sip of this here.
I was going to say,
IPA.
Just start drinking heavily and
just start drinking quickly.
turn your brain off.
Honestly, I can't believe it's only been 13 years with as much as you guys have like impacted in the Northwest, man. It's like, it seems like a short amount of time compared to like everything you guys have achieved up here, honestly.
Yeah.
Well, first keyword impact. Heck yeah, thanks. Or wait, I already heard F-bombs and everything, so maybe I'll loosen up a little bit more. Yeah, well, it is kind of weird. Somewhere around year 10, I started kind of referring to it this way myself, which is the rear view mirror. When you're when you're driving the car and you're in the race, you kind of are doing the best you can, right? And then at a certain point later, you get to look in the rear view mirror and kind of realize, heck, that worked, or maybe it worked really well. And I can't believe some of the things we've been able to achieve in those last 10 or 13 years as well. So,
Yeah.
Nice.
No, it's Boneyard Beers have had a rich history up here, and there's some great things, incredible things. Like memory lane of like Iron Fist,
Armored Fist, yeah.
Armored Fist, yes, thank you. Freaking girl beer.
Gonna go girl beer, huh?
Yeah.
All
Remember
right,
that one
all right.
very, very fondly. Like, yeah, and
Black 13.
Black
yeah.
13.
Yeah. When's that going to come back up here?
You know, two things with Black 13. First, I'm going to take advantage of the opportunity to tell you about the formulation, the construct of that beer, because it's a really fun brewer's tale or actual truth to sort of the construct recipe design.
Speaking my language now, Tony.
And we only make it about once a year these days. However, in the last couple of weeks, I've always been curious about making Black 13 at 13% alcohol. So right now, and then I kind of felt like I missed my window for our 13-year anniversary party, which was last weekend. But then I realized, heck, it's our 13th year all year long.
Yep.
So we're going to make Black 13 at 13% ABV for Halloween.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
And then probably lay some down in some fresh bourbon barrels or whatever that are really rich in in material from the distillery, and then pull that out in the wintertime for some 90-day turn bourbon barrel aged black 13%. I always loved that beer. I just thought a lot of times in a brewery's lifespan, you go make a special recipe and then you give it a name, right? But back probably 15 years ago, before I had the brewery, I was filling up folders with concepts for this brewery that I was going to build. And one of those was Black 13. I just thought it was a cool name for a beer, and there'd be a black ale, and it would be, not necessarily any particular style of black ale or beer, because it was 13 Plato, it was 13 IBU. That was how the construct started. But once we got going, I just started taking it way further. So again, Black 13 is, it's got 13% Munich, 13% wheat, 13% roasted barley, 13 grams, ounces of pounds of any other thing that you can think of. Everything on the brew log is a function or a factor of 13. So the formulations, calculations, weights, and measures all are regulated by 13. So the beer just fits into its own style, whatever the heck it is, because, again, it's only allowed any metric of 13.
Sweet.
It might be a little overly roasted,
movie.
But so there you have it with Black 13. I look forward to making the Black 13 at 13% ABV this year. Girl beer, yeah. You know what? We don't really make that brand anymore. I heard someone ask me about Arizona earlier. I used to brew in Arizona for a couple of years at a small brewery called Rio Salado in Tempe, and we made a cherry wheat beer back then, and I loved it. Brewers can maybe get pigeonholed into, these certain categories of barley wines or barrel aged or whatever have you, but a nice 4.5%, wheat-based beer with a secondary fermentation on cherries, with a bunch of acidulated malt carbonated to 2.8. Bring it.
Ooh, yeah.
I'm on. You know what I mean? It's just it's a little tart, a little fruity, super delicious, effervescent, kind of like a little mimosa almost.
Yeah.
It's going to be 80 degrees in Tacoma this weekend, so that sounds amazing right now.
For Boneyard and in the craft beer space 12 and a half, 13 years ago, it just didn't work for our brand or the consumer at that time. Who knows? But, so we just eventually fell back to where our lane, hops.
Your strong suit.
Yeah.
Speaking of, believe the thing that we are all drinking is a little collaboration with, I don't know if you heard of Georgetown Brewing. Sort of young upstarts in the...
Dumb question, Roger. Every day since then, you motherfucker. I love you, and it's great to see you.
Collaborators in the house.
Yep.
It's delicious.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. I think it is as well. Sometimes you get involved with these projects. I feel like I'm talking too much, but you get involved with these one-off projects, and you're working with a really respectable brewer that's got their craft honed in. But on these one-off projects, you're like, well, what are we going to do? What ABV? What thing? Like, what kind of hops? What's our strategy? And so one-off projects don't always deliver. You're going to take some risk, either from the recipe construct or the way that the two breweries mash up, and you get to the actual brew day and the fermentation style. But this beer came together really, really well. And I think that's a toast to kind of our brewing strategies and styles. And I mean, we called it draft only because, we kind of ran IPAs in Oregon with RPM for so many years, draft only. And I think Georgetown has a long history of a similar maybe it wasn't, I'll speak for myself, it wasn't strategy. It's just how we did our game. Mm-hmm. So when we got together about a year ago and showed up at the brewery, Norm brought us down there, and we're having some beers, and I'm looking around the brewery, and we're having more beers, and then the concept of making a collaboration came up, and I was super flattered, of course, but I also am a big fan of that organic pathway to make a beer with somebody. Sometimes I get knocked on the door from a supplier from a city and a state somewhere else that's just linked up with a distributor in my market. So they're like, hey, let's make a beer. And I'm like, that's cool, but what's your name again? You know? So I love just the organic nature, how this project came together. Now we are in the same distribution house up here in Washington State, so that made it user-friendly because sometimes some of these collaborative constructs, when you have different distribution representation, it creates a little bit of conflict somewhere. Anyhow, the beer's amazing. Since we're talking about it, if I remember right, we're running about 5 hops, all C hops. We decided to stay West Coast, slightly old school, not hazy. That's how I roll. So the hop bill would have been Centennial, Cascade, Comet, CTZ, and Chinook, I believe. Probably 3-4 pounds per barrel, typical stuff these days.
Yeah. That's pretty big.
Yeah.
That's good.
Well, it's a one-off beer. You can slip some things past the bookkeeper a little bit, right? They haven't had a chance to audit it yet,
Yeah. Ask for forgiveness, not permission.
So all that being said, yes, the organic nature, the respect for each other, the time and place. It's a beautiful day here, and we're launching this new IPA that we brewed together. It's damn darn tasty.
Yeah.
Really.
Damn.
We did one recently. I'll tell you a little secret. I've got one in the tanks right now that one-off IPA I brewed for Firestone Invitational, which is June 3rd, I believe. And we're playing with a new hop variety. It wasn't a collaboration brew. It was just me trying to make a one-off beer with this new hop 1019, 50% by weight 1019, 25% by weight Simcoe Citra, right? So you got your new hop variety, but you also lean in for your insurance with some Citra and Simcoe.
The old standards.
And, it's a good beer, but I'm a little less happy about what I'm tasting across my tongue right now with that beer as I am with this beer. So,
Yeah.
yep.
How long were you at Firestone Walker?
365 days. Seriously, 1 year to the day. Now, I have the most respect for Firestone and Brynildson, everybody there, and it was a big part of my I've been playing there in the craft beer game since '89, and I learned so much in that 1 year. Firestone does some really, really good work. However, Brynildson and I go way back, and he slipped me into a position where I was co-managing the packaging line. But I'm I'm from the brew deck and the brewer and all these type of things. I'd run my Maheen bottling line at some point in the past. So anyhow, taking on that level of responsibility at Firestone in the packaging department, it just wasn't my thing. So at 6 months in, I left my notice, worked another 6 months, and stayed there for 1 year because it just felt noble or something, right? Did my year. But again, I learned a lot with that job description at that brewery in that 1 year. And it really is a big part of how I approach the finished beers, I think the way they should taste and be presented.
Yeah.
Nice.
Big fan, Firestone.
It's a lot of value for 1 year's worth of work, actually.
It was.
That's great.
What I learned a lot about, which is, being up, most brewers kind of start off, you're making the most spectacular recipes and you're sourcing the best raw materials and, your little strategy about adding X pounds of hops at X point in the brew house. All that stuff's very true. But, getting through filtration, bright beer, and packaging with as much attention to detail and respect for the liquid is not easy. And that is where good flavor comes from. From seamer capper back to filtration is where a lot of the war, I believe, is won, right? So you can go out and make all these strategies to make the most hoppy beer ever, but if you don't mind your manners, post-fermentation, it's just going to taste like cardboard or something anyhow.
Yeah, just gonna get wasted.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you thought this beer was like a touch old school, the draft only collab that you did with Georgetown, and I see what you're saying, but people are starting to ask for this exact beer again. You've kind of famously made beer that has been sort of against the grain of consumer whims since your guys' inception. Has it felt pretty awesome to sort of see people start asking for the beer that made you guys famous in the first place again?
I'm not sure if I thought exactly. So
So like these West Coast IPAs, like that are it's not entirely malt balanced, but there's a little bit in there.
Yeah.
Like I know that I know what you're saying when you say it's like a little bit old school, but like to me this is actually still a contemporary version of a West Coast IPA, and people are starting to ask for it again, which is the same kind of beer that made your brewery so well known in the first place. It's got to be nice to see people asking for this stuff again after years of haze craze.
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely correct with a lot of what you just said. You know, in regards to this beer, I feel like it's old school only because we're not leaning in on some of these modern varieties of hops that are so popular. You know,
fair
some
enough.
some Stratas, some I barely brew in these varieties. What are they? You know, so we really kind of kept the Centennial, Chinook, CTZ, and the things that helped our companies grow. You know, from back a decade ago or even more than that. It's clearly probably kind of on the not contemporary in terms of pounds per barrel of hops used, when and where and how you use them, and the malt construct. I mean, it falls, for me, it aligns with the modern IPA. We're just using kind of older varieties of hops.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Are you still strapping the board on and hitting Bachelor?
I've got a broken knee. My knee bone is extremely effed. So no. The only day I've rode this year, 2 days, I just returned from Japan. I rode Niseko. So that was everything I could do to sneak a beer on the gondola and pop 2 ibuprofen and traverse across to the lodge to get a beer. And then it was the same thing, snuck another beer in the gondola and then traversed back to my hotel. So technically I was getting rad, sort of, but not so much. Last few years we've been doing backcountry, split board, snow bike, things like that keep me entertained, and they have more suspension, better suspension than my knee does.
Was that what brought you to Bend, snowboarding?
You guys have done your homework. Yeah, you know, I came from Santa Barbara, a bunch of us sort of surf, skate, snow rats, which got us eventually to Tahoe for snowboarding. And then back then in Tahoe, you could only ride Boreal, Donner, some places like that. And I kept hearing about Mount Bachelor. They were open to 4th of July. It was a big mountain that had high-speed quads. And that kind of lured me to Bend. And then I'm just going to continue on really quick because maybe you're going to ask me or not anyhow, which then got me to someone's couch because I needed a place to stay. And his buddy worked in the kitchen at Deschutes Brewery. And I was just kind of the dude sleeping on the couch that didn't have a job. And they're like, you know, we don't mind smoking a little weed and snowboarding with you, but when are you going to get a job? And that's, you know, and that's
when
kind of...
the weed runs out. I know that answer.
Yeah. Which essentially was 89, I believe. And I got a job at Deschutes Brewery through some of that stuff, which kind of got me here today. So, I mean, it's pretty, in a strange way, interesting how the snowboarding got me to Bend and met some people and got a job in the industry. Previous to that, I'd loved Sierra Nevada and all these import beers. I was not a home brewer. I wasn't even thinking about home brewing. I liked good weed and good beer. But so that's kind of what got me to Deschutes.
Yeah. And you met John Harris.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
John Harris. Go ahead. Sorry.
And he pulled you into the brew house.
Exactly what happened, really. We'd drink beers. I'd ask him questions about brewing or beer, and he kind of was really curious about snowboarding, and I built him a board, and then, you know, we... next thing you know, I was washing his kegs.
Fair trade. That's a fair trade.
Yeah. And then, of course, you know, coming up through the ranks in the brewery, well, first of all, Deschutes was probably 1,500 barrels a year then, so they're going quickly, and then you go from washing kegs to filling the kegs to cleaning the bright beer tanks or whatever have you. And then finally one day you make closing brewer. So you chase that last ward out and scrub the floors.
And then you know you've made it.
I was pretty stoked.
Yeah.
I can buy a box spring now.
Other stops on the origin story of Tony. Out east, the connection with the Three Floyds.
Oh, sure. Well, after I left Firestone, I kind of made a small commitment to myself that would be my last salary job. I mean, I just was more curious about things in my future than looking for another salary job and whatever that was going to be. And I kind of figured out a way to play in a role, sell myself. People believed me. No, it was good. But as a consultant or brewery fabricator, installer, or both. So and brokering equipment. So after that many years, I learned how to TIG weld and do various things, and so I was able to travel around a lot and help breweries out, and that got me. I mean, I went to school in '99 at Siebel in Chicago, and I met the Three Floyds guys there, and we became quick friends. And then you know what? I think it was CBC Seattle, 2000. Well, I don't know what year that was here, but I'm guessing like 2006 or 7 or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was hanging out with the Three Floyd guys because we got to know each other, and they were having little problems with their staffing at the brewery in Munster. And Nick said, "What are you doing Monday?" I'm like, "Well, I don't know." And so he's like, "If I buy you a ticket, we buy on that airplane, and you can come help us figure out how to solve our issues at the brewery." It was mostly staffing. And so anyhow, that really cemented our relationship. And I'd go out to Three Floyds for 2 or 3 months a year, maybe 2 weeks or 6 weeks at various times during their growth curve. And they were short on staffing, or I helped a lot with building the bottling line or other retrofit of brewing equipment. But here's where the story goes. So Nick called me up one time and he says, "Hey, Tony, you know, I got this." He was putting a new brew house in, and the old brew house was in the way. And he needed some help. Who's going to come cut this thing out? Who's going to get it out of my way and do it really, really quick? And I was like, "Well, I'll be there this Friday. But, you know, where's that brew house going to go?" Because I had a 5-barrel brew house at that time in my little startup in Bend. And so I'll fast forward the story. Nick and I cut a deal. I said, "I'm going to extract that brewery, but I'm going to put it on a truck and send it back to Bend." and he says, "Well, that's going to cost you $20,000 or $25,000, which of course I didn't have that. And then, but we're bros and we go way back. And he goes, "How about 5% of your company for that brew house?" That, you know, and I was like, "Well, of course." So that's kind of where I got my first 20-barrel brew house. And Nick got 5 points off the deal, and I got a brew house. It couldn't have been. And again, I love organic stories or serendipity or whatever. Yep, so that was awesome. I think he got a pretty good deal out of that. And you know what, we're here talking about, but you know, Nick and I are really tight, and I'm not going to speak too much to Nick, but we've never leaned in on that at all. He doesn't prefer, we just do our business and make a couple beers, you know, a collab every other year or something like that. But we keep it pretty much on the down low, or he prefers that I do.
The day that 5% exceeded that 25K number, you were like, "Son of a bitch." I'm making a phone call.
So, you know, there's a little bit of backstory to that. It was actually my 5-barrel brew house. I was Nick's first brew house. So I'd worked off my labor, and he gave me his 5-barrel brew house, which was, you know, like a wok burner underneath a single wall, non-insulated, and with 2 5-barrel fermenters, also non-insulated single wall, with this weird glycol jacket that was like this frisbee that went inside the middle of the tank that the plumbing went through the manway door. So anyhow, I finally got the 20-barrel brew house out to Bend because I was going to start with a 5-barrel, but the only fermenters I had were 2 5-barrel fermenters, and I named them Nick and Barnaby because it was Nick Floyd, and Barnaby was his right-hand man, one of my best friends. So Barnaby passed last year, RIP. So there I was filling a 20-barrel brew kettle to about 12 barrels, and then splitting the wort stream to 2 5-barrel fermenters. Nice. That was brew number 1. And that probably went on for 6 months before I got another 10-barrel or 20-barrel tank somewhere.
And you're okay. It's still on the down low. Like, no one listens to this. That's why we can cuss so much. That's true. Right. It's fine. You're good.
You know, as you may have heard, you probably, I'll wait for you guys to ask.
Ron will get to it.
Yeah.
He knows your whole life.
You know what else is kind of fun? Some of the tanks, I mean, whatever, I think I'll take this opportunity. Our project was whatever people want to read or think. It was 5 to 10 times as scrappy as anybody's imagination can be. in terms of financial investments, personal, private, or otherwise. We got about 13, 15 different breweries where I scabbed a refrigeration compressor or a heat exchanger or whatever it may be to get to make some beer at our brewery, which is why we call it the Boneyard, because we scrapped equipment from all over the country, from people's boneyards. Usually I was working at that brewery and I made, a friend, and because my old consulting business, then I'm like, what's that thing out back? And there's a glycol reservoir, and put it on a truck and send it home. The repeat process. That took a few years to scab together all that equipment. I need to dig that list out and kind of remember, of course, a Half Acre, Ninkasi, Deschutes, Three Floyds. There's a couple here in Washington. The pretty Beer Valley. I could go on, but pretty interesting list to get us started.
Yeah.
I love the idea that you've made like such crazy good, like very impactful beer on like a system that belonged to like 15 or 20 other places that are also separately famous for making great beer.
I mean, I brewed the other day at my old original brewery, the Lake Street 20 Barrel Brewhouse, the other day being Monday with Tyler Brown. So we did a collaboration a couple of days ago. He came out to our 13-year anniversary party, and then he stuck around for a couple of days because his 25 anniversary is in the first week of June. And so we made a special one-off IPA on Monday. That was really cool. I haven't been up technically on the brew deck that much in the last couple of years. We all, like with the Georgetown collab, we shoot a lot of emails and talk about hop varieties and how and when to use them. And we put this construct together and then hand off the responsibilities to the shift brewer. So it was fun to brew with Tyler on Monday. I only put 2 Band-Aids on.
That's a win for sure.
We're going to take a super quick break, but we will be back in just a minute. Welcome back. Thank you guys for hanging out. Once again, as always, want to give a quick shout out to Doug and to Channel 253.
Whoop, whoop, whoop.
I know you guys heard the shout out on the break, but yeah, please do go support Channel 253. They're awesome. We're super excited to be a part of their network and support those guys and stay connected because you will learn much more about this town and community than you had any idea you would. So yeah, go to channel253.com/membership to support them. Yeah, we're talking about Boneyard. What are we drinking here, Sean?
Oh, a little Suge Knight.
A little Suge Knight, dude.
Yeah.
That's what I thought
Suge
it was.
Good night, Sweet Prince.
Let's try it.
I didn't know that's what it was, and then when I saw you walking in with tasters, I was like, oh,
I didn't
man.
look at the tap list. Is it a barrel?
Straight up.
Yeah, it's good.
Lovely.
Oh, it's so good.
Should I tell you something about it?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right, let's try. I forgot to mention Clay and Melody, other co-founders, along with Nick Floyd. Nick Floyd is more silent and passive, but Clay, Melody, and I really, for the first 6+ years, were the driving force to, whatever, wearers of hats, correct? But our employee number 1, who I saw last weekend in our Brit, he lives in Bend, and he actually wore our first year anniversary shirt. He kept everything. I don't have any of this stuff. So he's like, Tony, look at this. So he was wearing our first year anniversary shirt the other day at our party, and that was amazing. But he was our employee number 1. He worked for like 6 months free. He just wanted to be a part of this, and he had time on his hands. I used to brew with him at Deschutes back in the 90s. So he's a lifelong brewer. And, free, yeah, absolutely free. With things like food every day, free beer, a cell phone. Eventually, we got him some teeth because he needed some work upstairs.
Oh man, are you guys hiring?
But he was the first employee and off the books for a lot of years. But his deal is Imperial Stouts. It wasn't exactly my deal. As a brewer, you have your things that you attach yourself to. Is there a home brewer or a professional brewer? I prefer dry stouts. Guinness is my thing. But his thing was Imperial Stouts. So this was his baby, Suge Knight. And I looked at the recipe construct and all that stuff, and I was like, where are you going with this, dude? But, it's an amazing beer, and it's Boneyard's first recipe that didn't come from my willy-nilly style. And with a name like Suge Knight, it's got some sort of, it's got some sort of cult following. And that he named it after, it's like, yeah, he was inspired by big badass.
Hip hop record producer.
So anyhow, that was Brits, baby. We've been making it forever. I really, really like it, and I hope you do as well.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
And you're right about that cult following thing.
Dude,
Got a
seriously.
couple numbers in the phone. They're like, hey, when it goes on, text me.
Okay.
Okay.
Jesse down at Apex, you go jump in there, and he's always been pulling it in. And, our tap panel's got that big rectangle up top where we put our sticker or whatever. And I walk in there for a Boneyard event, and he's got all the Boneyard stuff. And I look over and I go, And he had just, printed up this picture of Suge Knight smoking a cigar, the one, and put it on the tap panel. It was just epic. It's too good.
Nice.
When I was still buying at Bevmo, Boneyard, RPM was like a top 20 SKU at our Bevmo location because we put it on the growler station all the time. So our growler station was a part of the whole SKU list. So Corona 24 packs were a part of the same category as everything we poured on draft. And Boneyard RPM was still a top 20 SKU. And shout out to Mitch, who used to give me all kinds of beer that I did not deserve being a fucking Bevmo buyer. But we would throw a Biss on tap and fill growlers of that. Sorry to both of you for being that type of person. But yeah, I could never get Suge Knight. It was always out of reach for me.
We all just make it a few times. I mean, as the evolution, as the story continues, we only made it a couple times a year back in the day, probably because at the original Lake Street Brewery, the capacity was better invested in making RPM. and then, when you find some extra capacity, you find time to throw in some of these other beers that either you think people like or you just want to do it for yourself, Sometimes I find myself, I'm going to pivot to Notorious really quick because I do these events, these festivals around the world. I mean, I'm so fortunate with this beer game. It's took me across the whole world multiple times. And we often serve, like at McKellar Festival, for example, on Saturday night, Suge Knight and Notorious. And so they're all coming crazy, Suge Knight and Notorious. And Notorious is our triple IPA that I made for our first year anniversary. Now, however, the origin story of Notorious is a little bit like Black 13, not in terms of recipe, calculator, construct, but before there was a brewery, I was just putting ideas in folders and writing crap down. And so when we have the brand Suge Knight and the brand Notorious, people think we're leaning in on the rap thing. And then Suge Knight was just what Brit wanted to do, as I already shared with you. Notorious, I was just filling folders full of names and concepts, and I was at home 2008, pre-brewery, and the TV was blasting while I cooked dinner, and it said, up next, the Notorious Betty Page documentary or something like that. So I wrote down, after dinner, I wrote down that amazing word Notorious, and I said, well, Tony, what are you going to do that? Keep in mind, I didn't have a brewery, and I said, what are you going to do with this? So I didn't write a beer recipe down that evening, but the construct was, you got to make a triple IPA. And I don't know, this was 2008 or 9. I don't know if people are really making them or, anyhow, that's where the origin story comes from for the name of that brand. It was on television one night, and it just really motivated me to make this crazy IPA.
Yeah. We can drink it in cans now, too. Just lovely.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Shit, we Boneyard never had cans until the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
And now we do some small batch Notorious and use mobile packaging or something for the Notorious. It's this guy, was his name, Nate, down at Toronado, San Diego. He was this big Samoan guy that everyone loved, the doorman down there. And he loved Notorious. And yes, we do now sometimes do Notorious with a label and a 12-ounce can, but back then we'd fill crowlers and send them down to our friends down in San Diego. And this guy just punched a hole right in the bottom of that thing and shotgunned a 32-ounce Notorious in like 7 seconds or 3 seconds. I mean, come on.
Wow.
I mean, and about this time, I'm sorry if I'm talking too much, but this is funny because Notorious, I never really had laboratories and analyses of my beer. It tastes good. I got a calculator. I was taught in school, at brewing school. You measure, you calculate, you do your things. Well, in Notorious, for me, my construct is I use a lot of dextrose corn sugar in the recipe formulation for that beer because it helps dry it out a little bit more. It makes it more, easier to drink or enjoyable at this high
Super
ABV, right?
For high ABV.
So my calculations always told me Notorious was 11.5. And I knew the calculation was skewed because I'm using over 10% dextrose by weight, but by extract, that's like 15 or 17%,
Yeah.
So I always knew the calculation was skewed. But, our friends over at Deschutes ran it, and it came in at 13.2. So
we ran it on the Randall for like the end of the year, like our last one. We like to run something that you shouldn't probably. And one year we rolled Notorious, and holy shit, that was a lot of rough Tuesdays for some folks.
Sloppy Monday.
Because it was
Tuesday.
so sneaky. Like, I was like, 12.5 tastes like 7.9. Crushing them
The
back.
first time I ever had Notorious actually was Christmas Eve at the Parkway Tavern. I want to say in like 2015 maybe or 16.
How
was it?
did
That
you
was a
remember
year.
that?
Yeah. It was a year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah, one of the people at my table was crying. Not like because of Notorious, but also like kind of because of Notorious.
That beer is one of my favorite beers. It's kind of been our not by design, but it's kind of turned out to be that one beer in our lineup that's got that extra street cred somewhere across the other side of the country or even other side of the world.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And I'll be honest, I'm pretty hard on myself with the liquids we produce, but that beer is delicious. And it's basically Citra Mosaic with a bunch of pale malt and a bunch of dextrose. But something about, we make other beers using those similar strategies at lower ABV, and they taste similar, whatever that means. However, that huge fermentation creates its own set of circumstances that give that beer its own signature. And so, as a brewer or somebody that's constructing beer recipes, there's just something unique there that I couldn't calculate for in my formulations, right? It just has its own little something special that's derived through fermentation. It's hard to explain.
Mm-hmm.
So modest. That beer's fucking awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm like chugging the Shook Knight, I should say. Yeah, for a second.
No, you're doing it right. You listen to your heart, buddy.
It's going to get awful during the fucking story. Wait, is it?
Yeah.
Oh.
Don't ask me.
All right.
Yeah.
Sweet.
We'll require one more beverage somewhere along the line.
I know.
Yeah.
That's fine. We'll figure it out.
Yep. I'm having a great time, so. I didn't even know World Beer Cup was today. We figured out when we walked in here to do this podcast.
I know.
Like, what are you guys listening to?
We were listening to the Beer Cup like it was the fucking Mariners game on the radio.
Yeah. So, you mentioned it back to the just drinking good beer and smoking weed. Origin beers. That's always something I'm curious about, like things that are the spark for caring about craft beer. What was Tony's enlightenment?
Sure. I think I've been doing this for over 3 decades. Those things always, I hopefully continue to layer and stack upon each other each 5 or 7 years or whatever it is based off your interest at the time and your previous education, but you're stacking a new information education on top of it. But the answer to the question is, of course, Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the one,
Yeah,
right?
It
Like,
is.
okay,
Yeah,
okay.
Fucking green label.
Yep.
That, I mean, hands down, right?
Hands down. Yep.
I spent a lot of time all through the 90s at Deschutes, and I was a huge Mirror Pond fan.
Yeah.
And the first beer style that I went deep down the rabbit hole with as a young brewer trying to do find the information, gather the education, digest that, put it on a piece of paper, take it to wort construct or to beer, was my interpretation of Guinness. Guinness was the first one I just went really, really deep down on in probably 91 or something like that. 92. Yeah.
You tried it, and then you were like, I got to know more about what's going on here.
You know, there's a brewer, Joe Petticini, he's now a winemaker. He worked at Deschutes with me back then. That was his jam. He was from the East Coast, and it took me a minute. I was like, I don't know about this Guinness stuff, you know. But you know how these things are. The more you get exposed to it, you sit down, you think about it, and it became a passion. When at first I wasn't even had a thought bubble about it whatsoever. But it hooked me, and I went deep down the hole. Finally made my beer, Killarney. And you know, quickly on that, you know, I think making the Guinness, my recipe was 30% flaked, 15% roasted, and the rest 2 rows, some clean ale yeast to 9.8 Plato. Simple stuff, right?
Yeah, simple stuff for all you listeners out there.
But getting the CO2 and nitrogen in suspension correctly, so it poured correctly, was one of the bigger challenges. And the one I never could figure out with that is, are they doing sour mash or not? You know, were they using the lactic sour mash, or, you know? And so that eventually just fell off my curiosity bubble. I just made the effing beer, but I was still curious. Like, are they sour mashing that?
I believe I read a book about Guinness, and it's a lot. They actually put. Oh, yeah, I read a book a couple times. Awesome. Have you heard of Where the Sidewalk Ends?
I've only heard of
Basis
it.
of my life, bro. Sarah Sylvia Silverman Stout.
That's my name too.
But they actually take a portion of old. It's like an old stock, like a old sour beer, to blend in to give that tartness, and that's that intangible freaking thirst quenching quality of Guinness that I think is unique about it. And I've always wanted to. I'm right there with you. Like, I would love to chase that dragon.
I would take those like 7-gallon homebrewer carboys, you know, the clear kind of plastic, half opaque with the airlock thing on top, and put the mash, because I was brewing at Deschutes, I'd put the mash, steal the mash from the lauter ton. We were 0.2 Plato lower on our OG that one, sorry. And then put that in the boiler room. The boiler room at Deschutes is a perfect 120 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the perfect conditions to grow lactic or lacto.
Yeah.
And then I'd put that back in the mash. And nowadays, I just use acidulated malt.
Cheater.
Yeah. I mean, and you know, I'm a big fan of, as I already shared with you, dextrose, but I use acidulated malt in my IPAs pretty liberally. It's kind of like the salt of beer. It wipes the sides of the tongue clean, presents the hops more effectively, I believe. You know, it's not always the hops you use, but it's what you can sort of stack them on or not stack them on. So we all know now that very effervescent carbonated beer is going to let those hops jump out of the glass. Use that acidulated malt, get rid of the crystal malt and some of those other things, and just really put those hops on a platform where they can just be showcased. And acidulated malt's one of, I think we all do it. I wouldn't call it a trick, but I use it pretty heavy.
How's the water in Bend? Do you have to mess with it a lot?
This is we're not at Boneyard, baby. Bend water is basically snow melt surface water, or about, like, if I remember right, like 40 parts per million total dissolved solids, TDS. So really clean, simple water. We are high in silica, but I didn't really read about that. And of course we got some chlorine and things like that. But no, actually, Boneyard has never ever treated the water from an incoming standpoint. We play the brewer salt game, right? You know, why we're going to use this type of salt for what type of effect on the beer. And one thing that's always kind of not puzzled me, but when I'm being honest with myself, so we're brewing, 5 or 6 days a week. So when you show up at 4 a.m, the water that's in the hot liquor tank has been at temperature all night, so the chlorine's been driven off. But the next 2-3 batches you brew that day, that's not the same.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because you're making up water and hasn't have enough time for the chlorine to be driven off. So anyhow, that's kind of like my dark little secret. No, we don't treat the water. The first beer is chlorine free. The next two, sort of.
I like swimming in lakes. I like swimming in swimming pools. They're all great.
Well said.
Burns my eyes. You said that you attended Siebel in Chicago in '99. So you had started at Deschutes a decade prior to that. Like,
Yeah.
What did you feel like you were going to get out of attending a world famous brewery school after working at Deschutes for 10 years?
Well, in respect to Deschutes, we had really aggressive in-house education. Dr. Bill Pengelly was our brewmaster, so we'd have every Wednesday at 5 or whatever, we had in-house education. Every 2 years during that era of Deschutes, maybe still, I don't know, a brewer who has shown the most desire and interest in excelling their career through various functions of how you perform or personal education would be sent to Siebel. So my number finally got called. I thought I was supposed to be 2 years before that. No, I'm kidding, Mark. No, I got passed over by Mark Hinion, who's a Van Hinion Brewing Company now, which those are the guys, pretty interesting, that took over the old Boneyard facility. Maybe we'll get to that later. So Mark surpassed me. Anyhow, that's just what happened. Every 2 years during that era, somebody from Deschutes would go to Siebel and go. So we did the diploma course. It was darn near 10 weeks. And I lived at the Leaning Tower YMCA, and yep.
I applied for the Glenn H. Falconer scholarship for like 5 years, and every time I sent my essay in, I was like, "This is the fucking year." Like, how can someone possibly read this and not give me the scholarship? Yet here we are.
I went in '99 diploma course, and shortly thereafter, the Siebel Institute restructured how they operate. So I've always been sort of proud that I was a graduate of the last official, course that they ran for a century. Previous to the revised course as the generational family members and the construct of the facility. They moved out of the whatever street that was in Chicago. And then, my friend Jamie Seifer, I think he's at 10 Barrel now. I think he was the next brewer from Deschutes to go. And he's over in Germany doing like Siebel stuff. And I was like, wait a minute, dude. I had to stay at the YMCA in Chicago
I got
and do the old school program, and you get to go to Munich. What the heck?
Because that was, I think the second year I applied, they had split it. It's 6 weeks in Chicago and 6 weeks in Munich. I was like, oh, well, I'm glad I didn't win last year because I want to go to Munich. Yeah.
I was a little miffed then for whatever reason, not truthfully, but being part of the original program, I'm certainly proud to have experienced that.
Absolutely.
Doug says it's fuck up story time.
Oh.
But I do want to talk more about Siebel, actually. But yeah, is there a fuck up story?
You guys weren't. I heard last night. Norm, where were we? Anyhow, I heard. I'm like, so what are we talking about tomorrow? And I heard one lean in was the F up story. Yeah, I got one. It's pretty fun. Probably lots of them. However, the one that stands out the most was a beer that we actually sold called Bonehead, Belgian Pale Ale by Boneyard, right? Bonehead. But the origin story was we were making RPM at the 20 Barrel Lake Street facility, 3 brews a day, 6 days a week, grinding it out, and then you taste the beers when you're doing your gravities and you're checking on your beers, and something just was off, and it was no doubt was off. I mean, you can taste things that are off. Let's be honest, but I mean like off, and it tasted phenolic and kind of like it. So, whether one of my guys with our yeast program or the supplier of the yeast sent us something that was not pure from a DNA standpoint, it tastes, anyhow, RPM tastes kind of like a Belgian beer. And, and so we decided not to dry hop that. and Bonehead Belgian Pale Ale was born.
Just off of like a yeast.
It was
fuck up.
good. I mean, it was just had a slight funny yeast effect that wasn't our house flavor. It tasted like a little bit like a Belgian Pale Ale. So off it went.
For people listening, when you hear phenolic, if you're not a big nerd that digs into that kind of shit, it's like the spiced flavors that you get in some beers, really common in Belgian and German beers and some European beers, but clove, cinnamon, nutmeg, things like that. There's a long list of phenolic flavors, but that's like what you'd expect from a Belgian beer. And if your IPA was coming off like that, then now it's a Belgian pale.
Yeah, it was really good.
And funny story, listening to the ceremony of awards, there was a Bonehead that took some hardware home today.
What was that? Was that Fatheads?
Sure was.
Yeah.
Which
Shout out to
is fucking hilarious. Also, I think we can benchmark the time now, and I can draw up some cease and desist paperwork for you.
First use.
I'm getting pretty good at this stuff.
First use 2013.
Hey, so you know.
Boneyard Bonehead.
I'm gonna have to on the metal a little asterisk.
Yeah. I enjoyed that beer, but we switched yeast suppliers shortly thereafter, and that was one of my you asked me what happened in the past, and that's the one that stands out.
Nice. I'm glad you turned it into a win.
Yeah. Nice flip around, Tony. Nice freaking job.
All right, Grit and Grainers, email us at cheers@gritandgrainpodcast.com with your comments, opinions, and Boneyard's next Unicorn IPA. After the just released 13th anniversary 13% quadruple IPA, maybe such as 14% bone of contention, 15% feel it in my bones, and the 16% even more biscotti bones. We read and drink everything we receive, and we try to respond as quickly as we can. If not online, then on air. You can subscribe to Grit and Grain on Amazon, Apple Music, Spotify, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and Stitcher, and please leave us a review. Also, check us out on Channel 253.
Yay, Doug.
And gritandgrainpodcast.com. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for episode notes, beer news, and open letters to global warming, because even though we hate global warming and your stupid plans to melt our polar ice caps and flood our coastal cities and bleach our massive coral reefs and melt ice cream sandwiches and force us not to take showers for 6 days at a stretch, and remind us that Paris Climate Accord is bad for the pesticide industry, and melt mom's face while she's enjoying a sweet potato breakfast casserole Sunday. But damn it, we don't care, because after a winter and spring we just went through, we're ready to throw ourselves into your arms and enjoy a bona fide pale ale without wearing a parka in our backyard late at night during this early May weekend, yo. If this podcast is not what you expected, please alter your expectations. Mothers know what it's like to be inoculated. Buy them a beer Sunday. No such thing as a bad time to visit Tacoma. No such thing as too much barley wine. Tune in next Friday for more sweet chatter. Cheers.
Cheers. Let it be known, baby. Let it be known. Yeah, that was fun.
Woo. Cody, thank you, Ed.
Thank you so much.
That was good stuff. Really appreciate it.
Fuck yeah, that was awesome.
Great one.
Thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget to follow us at Grit and Grain Podcast wherever you get your social media, and catch new episodes every Friday. Cheers.
Good up.
This is Channel 253.